The morning I found the bright orange sticker plastered across my garage door declaring my snow plow blades as unauthorized storage violations. I knew my life in the Pleasant Valley Estates HOA in Colorado Springs. Colorado was about to get complicated. I'm Gerald Winston, and I've been running a snow removal business in Colorado for 15 years. When I bought my house in this gated community 3 years ago, I read through the covenants and restrictions like any sensible person would. There was nothing about storing business equipment in your garage. Nothing. I checked twice because I knew HOAs could be particular about these things. The sticker was dated that very morning at 6 a.m. I yanked it off and read the violation notice attached to my front door. According to this official-looking document, I had 72 hours to remove all commercial equipment from the premises or face daily fines starting at $100 per day. The letter was signed by Patricia Henderson, HOA president, and included a lovely threat about placing a lien on my property if I didn't comply. I walked back into my garage and looked at my plow blades. I had 6 of them, ranging from 7 to 9 feet wide, stored neatly on custom wall mounts I'd built myself. They weren't blocking anything. They weren't visible from the street. My garage door stayed closed except when I was coming or going. These blades represented over $40,000 in equipment that I needed for my business. My phone rang. It was my biggest client, the Westmont Shopping Center. Gerald, hey, it's Dave from Westmont. We've got that big storm coming in this weekend. You're still good for the contract, right? I looked at my plow blades mounted on the wall. Yeah, Dave, I'm good. I'll have my crew ready to go. Perfect. Weather service is saying 12 to 18 inches, going to be a busy one. After I hung up, I immediately called the HOA office. A chipper voice answered on the third ring. Pleasant Valley Estates, HOA. This is Brenda speaking. Hi, Brenda. This is Gerald Winston from 447 Meadowbrook Lane. I received a violation notice this morning about my snow plow equipment, and I need to speak with someone about this. There's nothing in the CC and Articus about storing business equipment in my garage. There was a pause. I heard papers shuffling. Let me check your file. Oh yes, Mr. Winston, Mrs. Henderson personally conducted an inspection yesterday and noted several commercial-grade snow plow blades visible in your garage. Visible how? My garage door was closed. Another pause. I'm not sure about the specifics of the inspection, Mr. Winston, but the violation stands. You'll need to remove the equipment within 72 hours. I'd like to appeal this. What's the process? You can submit a written appeal to be heard at the next board meeting, which is in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The notice says I have 72 hours before fines start. That doesn't give me any time to appeal before I'm being charged. That's correct, sir. You can still appeal, but the fines will continue to accrue until the violation is resolved. You can request a refund of the fines if your appeal is successful. I felt my blood pressure rising. Can I speak to Patricia Henderson directly? Mrs. Henderson is very busy, but I can leave her a message. Please do. Tell her Gerald Winston called and that this violation notice doesn't cite any actual covenant violation. I want to know specifically which rule I'm breaking. I hung up and immediately pulled out my copy of the CC and Articus. I spent the next 2 hours going through every single page. There were rules about not parking commercial vehicles in driveways, rules about not running a business that brings clients to your home, rules about exterior appearance and lawn maintenance, but nothing, absolutely nothing about what you could store inside your own garage. My wife Claire had warned me about HOAs before we bought the house. But the location was perfect, the price was right, and the neighborhood was beautiful. I thought I could handle whatever minor annoyances came with HOA living. That afternoon, I drove to the HOA office located in the community center building near the front entrance of Pleasant Valley Estates. Brenda, a woman in her 30s with auburn hair, greeted me at the desk. "I'm Gerald Winston. I called earlier about the violation notice." "Oh yes, I left Mrs. Henderson a message, but I haven't heard back yet. Can you tell me which specific covenant I'm violating? Because I've read through the entire document twice now." Brenda looked uncomfortable. She pulled out a folder and flipped through some pages. "The violation is listed under Section 7, subsection D, which covers nuisances and unsightly conditions. My garage door is closed. How is equipment inside my garage creating an unsightly condition?" According to Mrs. Henderson's notes, she observed the equipment during a routine inspection and determined it constitutes commercial storage not appropriate for a residential setting. Routine inspection of what? The inside of my garage. Brenda shifted in her chair. "I really think you need to discuss this with Mrs. Henderson directly." "Great. When can I meet with her? I'll have to check her schedule." Brenda turned to her computer and clicked around for a minute. "She has an opening Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. Friday afternoon? That's 2 days away. My 72 hours will almost be up by then." "I'm sorry, Mr. Winston. That's the earliest she's available." I left the office frustrated but booked the appointment. For the next 2 days, I researched HOA law in Colorado and consulted with an attorney who specialized in property law. His name was Martin Cooper, and his office was in downtown Colorado Springs. "The thing about HOA covenants is that they can be interpreted broadly," Martin explained during our consultation. "This nuisance clause could theoretically apply to anything the board deems inappropriate. But the key word is reasonable. Is it reasonable to call neatly stored equipment inside a closed garage a nuisance? Probably not. But fighting it could cost you more in legal fees than just renting a storage unit." "It's the principle," I said, "and also I need quick access to this equipment. When a storm hits, I can't be driving across town to a storage unit. My clients depend on me being ready to go immediately." Martin nodded. "I understand. Here's my advice. Go to the meeting Friday. Record it if Colorado's one-party consent law allows, which it does. Get them to explain exactly how you're violating the covenant. If they can't provide a reasonable explanation, you'll have grounds to fight any fines. But be prepared for this to get expensive and time-consuming." I left Martin's office with a retainer agreement and a lot to think about. The big storm was supposed to hit Saturday night into Sunday. I needed my equipment accessible. Friday afternoon arrived, and I showed up at the HOA office at 4 p.m. sharp. Brenda told me Mrs. Henderson was running a few minutes late. Those few minutes turned into 30. When Patricia Henderson finally swept into the office at 4:35, I understood immediately why she was HOA president. She was probably in her mid-50s, with blonde hair styled in that aggressive suburban cut that screamed management. She wore a pantsuit despite it being Friday afternoon in a community center office. Her expression was pleasant but cold, like a flight attendant dealing with an annoying passenger. "Mr. Winston, I'm Patricia Henderson. I understand you have concerns about your violation notice." She gestured for me to follow her into a small conference room. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, recording app visible. "I'm going to record this conversation for my records. Colorado is a one-party consent state, so I'm informing you as a courtesy." Patricia's smile tightened. "That's fine. I have nothing to hide. The violation is straightforward. I've read through the CC and Articus multiple times. There's nothing that prohibits storing equipment in my garage." Patricia folded her hands on the table. Section 7. Subsection D clearly states that owners must not create nuisance conditions or unsightly situations that diminish property values. Commercial equipment stored on residential property falls under that provision. The equipment is inside my closed garage. How did you even know it was there? I conducted a routine inspection of the property. Of the inside of my garage, Patricia's expression didn't change. As HOA president, I have the authority to ensure compliance with our covenants. During an inspection of your property's exterior, I noticed your garage door was open and observed the commercial equipment mounted on your walls. My garage door is never open except when I'm pulling in or out. It was open on Wednesday afternoon at approximately 2 p.m. I happened to be driving past and noticed the violation. I tried to remember Wednesday afternoon. I had been at Westmont Shopping Center meeting with Dave about the upcoming storm. My wife Claire had been at work. We had definitely both left with the garage door closed. Even if my garage door was open, which I don't recall, storing equipment inside my garage doesn't violate any covenant. The CC and Articus specifically mention no commercial vehicles in driveways and no business operations that bring customers to the property. I comply with both of those rules. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Mr. Winston, the board has interpreted the nuisance clause to include commercial storage. We've had issues in the past with residents trying to run auto repair shops, woodworking businesses, and other commercial operations out of their garages. This policy protects property values for everyone. I'm not running a business out of my home. I'm storing equipment that I need immediate access to because my clients depend on me responding to weather emergencies. Then I suggest you rent a commercial storage facility like other business owners. That's unreasonable. We're talking about emergency snow removal. Minutes matter when a storm hits. Patricia stood up. The board's decision is final unless you go through the formal appeal process. You have until tomorrow morning to remove the equipment, or fines will begin accruing. $100 per day adds up quickly. I'm appealing this decision. When's the next board meeting? 3 weeks from Monday. You'll receive a notification with the details. I suggest you remove the equipment in the meantime to avoid accumulating fines. I left the meeting angry and frustrated. The storm was coming tomorrow night. I called Martin Cooper and left him a message about what happened. That evening, Claire and I discussed our options over dinner. Can you just put the blades in a storage unit for now? She asked. Fight it later without the daily fines piling up. The storm is tomorrow night. I've got 6 properties contracted for Sunday morning. I need those blades mounted on the trucks and ready to go the second the snow stops. If I'm driving to a storage unit, that's an extra hour of delay. An hour where my competitors are already out clearing parking lots, Claire sighed. This is exactly why I didn't want to buy in an HOA. I know, you were right. But we're here now, and I'm not going to let Patricia Henderson bully me into compliance with a rule that doesn't exist. Saturday morning arrived, and I woke up to another orange sticker on my garage door. This one was more aggressive. The violation was now listed as ongoing and willful non-compliance. The fine schedule was outlined in detail. $100 per day for the first week, $200 per day for the second week, $500 per day after that. They could also pursue legal action to place a lien on my property. I took photos of everything and sent them to Martin Cooper. Then I went into my garage and looked at my Plow blades. They represented years of investment in my business. I couldn't just surrender them to appease an HOA president on a power trip. My phone rang. It was my crew chief, Tommy. Boss, we ready for tonight? Weather Service updated the forecast. They're saying 20 inches now. We're ready. Have everyone meet at my house at 8 p.m. We'll get the blades mounted and stage the trucks. Once the snow stops, we roll out. You got it. I spent the day preparing. Checked all the trucks, made sure the mounting hardware was ready, confirmed the contracts with all my clients. By 8 p.m., my crew arrived. 3 guys with 3 trucks plus my own truck. We worked in my driveway, loading the plow blades onto the trucks and securing them properly. The snow started falling around 10 p.m. Big, heavy flakes that meant business. By midnight, there were already 6 inches on the ground and it showed no signs of stopping. My crew stayed at my house, rotating sleep shifts so someone was always monitoring the weather. At 5 a.m. Sunday morning, the snow finally stopped. We had gotten just over 21 inches, perfect packing snow that would be hell to plow through. We fired up the trucks and headed out to our contracts. The Westmont shopping center took us 4 hours. The snow was heavy and wet, and the plows strained under the load. But we got it done, and Dave was happy. We moved on to the other properties. By the time we finished the last one at 2 p.m., we were all exhausted but satisfied. Another successful storm response. I got home and pulled into my driveway, planning to unload the plow blade and get some sleep. That's when I noticed Patricia Henderson standing in my driveway with 2 other people. A man in his 60s wearing a Pleasant Valley Estates polo shirt, and a younger woman with a clipboard. "Mr. Winston," Patricia said as I climbed out of my truck. "This is Derek Thompson, head of our violations committee, and Samantha Park, our property manager. We need to discuss your continuing violation." I was too tired for this. "Mrs. Henderson, I've been working for 13 hours straight." "Whatever you need to discuss can wait." "Actually, it can't. As you can see, you still have commercial equipment on your property. That's now 2 days of violations. You owe the HOA $200 in fines. The equipment is on my truck, which is parked in my driveway." "Is that now a violation too?" Derek spoke up. "Commercial vehicles aren't permitted to be parked in driveways overnight. That's Section 4, subsection B of the CC and Article S." I had read that section. That applies to vehicles displaying commercial logos or signage. My trucks don't have any business identification on them specifically because of that rule. Samantha made a note on her clipboard. "The vehicles have commercial-grade plow blades attached. That constitutes commercial equipment. So let me get this straight. I can't store the blades in my garage, and I can't park the trucks with the blades attached in my driveway. Where exactly am I supposed to keep the equipment I need for my business?" Patricia smiled. "We've been over this. You need to rent appropriate commercial storage." It's Sunday afternoon after a major storm. Even if I wanted to rent a storage unit, nothing's open today. "Then I suggest you remove the blades and store them elsewhere until you can make proper arrangements. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning before the overnight parking violation kicks in. The garage storage violation continues to accrue daily until resolved." They left, and I stood in my driveway fuming. I called Martin Cooper again, even though it was Sunday. He answered after a few rings. "Gerald, what's going on?" I explained the whole situation, including the new parking violation threat. "Here's the thing," Martin said. "They're technically correct about the overnight parking rule, but the garage storage issue is still questionable. However, if you want to fight this properly, you need to play by their rules until the board meeting. Otherwise, they'll claim you're in willful violation and it strengthens their position. So what do? Rent a storage unit tomorrow. Keep the equipment there until the board meeting. Document everything. Get statements from your clients about why you need quick access to the equipment. Build a case showing that their interpretation of the nuisance clause is unreasonable and targets your specific business. Then we present that at the board meeting. I didn't like it, but Martin was right. Monday morning, I spent 3 hours calling storage facilities. Most of the ones near Pleasant Valley Estates had waiting lists. I finally found a place called Secure Space Storage about 15 minutes away that had a 10 by 20 unit available. The monthly rent was $350. I signed a month-to-month lease and moved my plow blades that afternoon. The whole process ate up half a day I should have been using to catch up on sleep and maintain my equipment. When I got home, there was a notice from the HOA in my mailbox. I owed $400 in fines for the garage storage violation, payable within 30 days to avoid additional penalties. I paid it, not because I agreed with it, but because Martin advised me that refusing to pay fines during an active appeal made me look like I wasn't acting in good faith. I wrote a check and attached a letter stating that I was paying under protest and that the fines would be included in my appeal. The next 3 weeks crawled by. Every time I needed my plow blades for a job, I had to drive to Secure Space Storage, load them onto the truck, drive to the job site, do the work, then drive back to the storage unit and unload them again. It added hours to every job and cost me money in lost efficiency. We got 2 more smaller storms during those 3 weeks. Each time, the extra drive to the storage unit meant I lost the competitive edge I'd built my business on. One of my smaller clients, a medical office building, actually complained about my response time. I explained the situation, and they were understanding but made it clear that if it continued, they'd look for a more responsive contractor. Meanwhile, I built my case for the board meeting. Martin helped me prepare a presentation showing that my interpretation of the CC and Articus was correct, that the board's nuisance clause application was unreasonable and selective, and that I was being unfairly targeted. We included statements from 3 of my clients explaining why quick response time was essential for snow removal services. The board meeting was scheduled for a Monday evening at 7 p.m. in the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early with Martin. The community room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. About 20 people were already there for various other agenda items. Patricia Henderson sat in the center of the board table, with Derek Thompson on her right and 3 other board members I didn't recognize on her left. Samantha Park sat at a small desk to the side, apparently taking minutes. The meeting started with standard HOA business. Approval of last month's minutes, a financial report, discussion about repainting the community center, a proposal to update the playground equipment. Each item was handled efficiently, but with an undercurrent of tension that suggested this board took its authority very seriously. Finally, at 8:15 p.m. we reached appeals. Next, we have an appeal from Gerald Winston regarding a storage violation, Patricia announced. Mr. Winston, you have 10 minutes to present your case. I stood up, and Martin stood with me. Madam President, board members, my name is Gerald Winston, and this is my attorney, Martin Cooper. We're here to appeal the violation notice I received regarding storage of snow plow equipment in my garage. I walked them through my argument. The CC and Articus didn't specifically prohibit garage storage of business equipment. The nuisance clause was too vague to be applied in this situation. The equipment wasn't visible from the street and didn't impact anyone's property values. I needed quick access to the equipment for emergency storm response. I presented letters from my clients. When I finished, Patricia nodded. Thank you, Mr. Winston. The board will now discuss your appeal. Don't we get to hear their reasoning? Martin asked. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding. We should be able to respond to their concerns. Patricia's expression hardened. "This is an HOA board meeting, Mr. Cooper, not a courtroom. We'll deliberate and provide our decision." The board members huddled together, speaking in low voices for about 5 minutes. Then Patricia turned back to us. "The board has considered your appeal and we're denying it." The nuisance clause in Section 7, subsection D, gives the board broad authority to determine what constitutes an inappropriate use of residential property. Commercial equipment storage falls under that authority. The violation stands, and you must continue to store your equipment off-site. The fines you've paid will not be refunded. "What about the letters from my clients explaining the business impact?" I asked. "Your business concerns are not the HOA's responsibility, Mr. Winston. You chose to live in a community with covenants and restrictions. Those restrictions sometimes require accommodations in how you run your business." Martin stood up. "With all due respect, Madam President, this interpretation of the covenant is unreasonable and likely unenforceable. We'll be pursuing this matter further." "That's your right, Mr. Cooper." This meeting is adjourned. People started filing out. I sat there feeling defeated. 3 weeks of jumping through hoops, $400 in fines, and I was right back where I started. As we walked to the parking lot, Martin put a hand on my shoulder. "Don't give up yet. We knew this might happen. Now we can file suit in district court. A judge will look at this much more objectively than the HOA board." "How long will that take?" 6 months minimum. Maybe a year. And it'll cost you probably $10,000 in legal fees, maybe more if they fight it hard. I drove home and explained everything to Claire. She listened quietly, then said what we were both thinking. Maybe we should just sell the house and move somewhere without an HOA. We'd lose money. The market's down right now, and with an active HOA dispute on record, it'll be even harder to sell. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, I made a decision. I'm going to rent the storage unit for now and file the lawsuit. We'll see this through. The next morning, I called Martin and told him to proceed with filing suit against the HOA. He drafted a complaint arguing that the HOA's interpretation and application of the nuisance clause was arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable. We filed it in El Paso County District Court and waited for the legal process to grind forward. 2 weeks later, I got served with the HOA's response. They had hired a law firm that specialized in HOA defense. Their response argued that HOA boards have broad discretion in interpreting covenants, that my appeal had been properly heard and decided, and that the court should defer to the board's expertise in managing the community. Winter continued. More storms came. Each time, I dealt with the hassle of driving to secure space storage. My response time suffered. I lost one client to a competitor who promised faster service. The monthly storage fees added up. I was hemorrhaging money and time because of Patricia Henderson's power trip. Then, in mid-February, something interesting happened. We got hit with a massive storm, the biggest of the season. 30 inches of snow fell over a 48-hour period. It was an all-hands-on-deck situation. Every snow removal company in Colorado Springs was working around the clock. I was at the Westmont Shopping Center on the second day of storm response when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mr. Winston. This is Samantha Park from Pleasant Valley Estates HOA. I'm calling because we need your help with an urgent situation." I almost laughed. "You're kidding." "I'm not kidding. We have a serious problem. The company we contract with for snow removal in our community hasn't shown up. We have 35 inches of snow blocking our roads and residents can't get in or out. Several people have medical appointments they can't get to. We need someone who can handle a job this size immediately. And you thought of me. You're one of the largest contractors in Colorado Springs. Your equipment is exactly what we need." I let the silence hang for a moment. "My equipment that your HOA president forced me to store off-site because it violates your nuisance clause. Mr. Winston, I understand there's tension between you and the board, but this is an emergency. We're willing to pay premium rates. What's your normal contractor charge?" "We pay peak mountain snow removal $50 per hour per truck." "And where are they?" "They're completely overwhelmed. They said they can't get to us until tomorrow at the earliest." I thought about it. The petty part of me wanted to tell Samantha to call Patricia Henderson and ask her to shovel it herself. But the business owner part of me saw an opportunity. "I'll do it. But my rate is $150 per hour per truck, minimum 6 hours per truck. I'll need 4 trucks on site, so that's $3,600 minimum. Payment due immediately upon completion." Samantha gasped. "That's 3 times the normal rate. That's the emergency rate for immediate response when your regular contractor failed you. Take it or leave it." There was a pause. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. "Hold on. I need to get board approval for this expenditure." 5 minutes later, Samantha came back on the line. "The board has approved it. When can you get here?" "I need to pick up my equipment from the storage unit your HOA forced me to rent. So figure 2 hours. That's not acceptable. We need you here now." "Then you should have thought about that before you made me store my equipment 15 minutes away. 2 hours. Take it or leave it." Another pause, more muffled conversation. I could hear Patricia Henderson's voice in the background, sharp and angry. "Fine. 2 hours. But we expect you here no later than that." I hung up and called my crew. "Emergency job. Full rate premium pay for everyone. Meet me at Secure Space Storage in 30 minutes. We loaded up the trucks and headed to Pleasant Valley Estates. The development was indeed buried under massive amounts of snow. The main roads through the community were impassable. We spent the next 8 hours clearing roads, driveways, and common areas. It was hard work, but satisfying. Especially knowing that the HOA was paying me triple rate for the privilege of using the equipment they'd forced me to remove from my property. When we finished, I drove to the community center where Samantha was waiting with a check. Patricia Henderson stood beside her, looking furious. "Here's your invoice," I said, handing Samantha a printed form. 8 hours per truck, 4 trucks. That's $4,800. Samantha looked at the invoice. "You said $3,600. I said minimum $3,600. We worked for 8 hours. The rate is $150 per hour per truck. That's $4,800 total." Patricia stepped forward. "This is price gouging. We'll dispute this charge." I pulled out my phone and played the recorded conversation with Samantha. "You agreed to $150 per hour per truck, minimum 6 hours. We worked 8. This is the agreed upon rate. Martin had advised me to record everything related to the HOA. Best advice he'd given me yet." Samantha wrote the check. Her hand shook slightly as she handed it to me. "Here, $4,800. Pleasure doing business with you," I said. As I walked back to my truck, Patricia called after me. "This doesn't change anything, Mr. Winston. Your violation still stands." "I know. See you in court." The irony wasn't lost on me. The HOA had fined me $400 for storing equipment they then paid $4,800 to use. They'd forced me to rent a storage unit that cost me time and money, then suffered the consequences when their own snow removal needs became an emergency. I drove home and told Claire the whole story. For the first time in months, she laughed. "I can't believe they actually called you." Patricia Henderson looked like she wanted to murder me when I handed her that invoice. Good. Maybe this will make them realize how ridiculous this whole thing is. But I knew better. People like Patricia Henderson don't admit mistakes. They double down. Sure enough, 2 days later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined an additional $500 for operating a commercial business within the community during the snow removal work. Apparently, Section 4, Subsection C prohibited business operations that create traffic, noise, or disruption within the community. I forwarded the letter to Martin immediately. "This is retaliation," he said when he called me back. "Clear as day. They're mad that you charge them market rate for emergency services, so they're hitting you with a bogus new fine. This actually helps our case. It shows a pattern of selective enforcement and abuse of authority. How does it help our case if I'm racking up more fines?" "Because it demonstrates bad faith on the part of the HOA. Don't pay this one. Let them try to enforce it. It'll look terrible in front of a judge." Martin amended our lawsuit to include the retaliation claim and the new fine. The case was now getting more complex and more expensive. My legal fees had already hit $8,000, and we hadn't even gotten a court date yet. March came. The snow season was winding down. My business had suffered significantly from the storage unit hassle. I estimated I'd lost about $15,000 in efficiency, and one client worth $10,000 per year. The storage unit fees had cost me over $1,000. The HOA fines totaled $900, and my legal fees were approaching $10,000. All because Patricia Henderson had decided that plow blades in a closed garage were a nuisance. In mid-March, I got a call from Samantha Park again. "Mr. Winston, I'm calling to discuss a potential resolution to our ongoing dispute." "I'm listening." "The board has been discussing your situation, and we'd like to propose a compromise. We'll waive all outstanding fines and drop our opposition to your lawsuit if you agree to withdraw the suit and comply with the storage restriction going forward. So I'd still have to keep my equipment off-site." "Yes, but you'd avoid any further legal fees and get the fines refunded." "What about the money I've already spent on legal fees and storage? The board isn't prepared to reimburse those costs, but we think this is a fair resolution that allows both parties to move forward." I almost laughed. "You created this problem, cost me tens of thousands of dollars, and now you want me to agree to keep doing things your way with no compensation. That's not a compromise. That's surrender. Mr. Winston, continuing this lawsuit will cost you more money with no guarantee you'll win." "I'm willing to take that chance. Tell Patricia Henderson that if she wants to resolve this, she can start by admitting the storage violation was bogus and agreeing to let me store my equipment in my garage where it belongs." Samantha sighed. "I'll relay your response to the board." 2 weeks later, we finally got a court date. The hearing was scheduled for late April in front of Judge Rebecca Morrison. Martin was optimistic. Judge Morrison has a reputation for not tolerating HOA overreach. She's ruled against boards several times when they've exceeded their authority. "I think we've got a good shot." I hoped he was right. I'd invested too much in this fight to back down now. The hearing took place on April 23rd. The El Paso County Courthouse was busy that morning. Martin and I arrived early and set up in the courtroom. The HOA's attorney, a man named Richard Bergman, who looked like he'd never left his office except to play golf, arrived with Patricia Henderson and Derek Thompson. Judge Morrison took the bench at 9 a.m. sharp. She was in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested she didn't miss much. "We're here for Winston versus Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association. Counselors, this is a hearing on the plaintiff's motion for declaratory judgment regarding interpretation of the community's CC and Artiques. Mr. Cooper, you're representing the plaintiff." Martin stood. "Yes, Your Honor." And Mr. Bergman, you're representing the HOA, Bergman stood. Correct, Your Honor. Very well. Mr. Cooper, this is your motion. Proceed. Martin laid out our case clearly and methodically. The CC and Articus didn't specifically prohibit garage storage of business equipment. The nuisance clause was too vague to be applied to equipment stored inside a closed garage. The HOA had selectively enforced this interpretation against me, while other residents likely had business equipment in their garages without issue. The retaliation fine after I provided snow removal services showed bad faith. Judge Morrison listened carefully, occasionally making notes. When Martin finished, Bergman presented the HOA's defense. He argued that HOA boards need flexibility to interpret covenants to address situations the original drafters couldn't anticipate. The board had acted within its authority. My business equipment was commercial in nature and appropriately regulated under the nuisance clause. Then came the questioning. Mr. Bergman, Judge Morrison said, I've reviewed the CC and Articus. There are specific provisions about commercial vehicles, business operations that bring customers to homes, and exterior maintenance. Why didn't the drafters include a specific provision about garage storage if that was a concern? Your Honor, the nuisance clause is designed to be flexible to cover situations like this. But is flexibility the same as unlimited discretion? What limits the board's authority under this clause? Bergman seemed to struggle for a moment. The board must act reasonably and in good faith for the benefit of the community. And was it reasonable to fine Mr. Winston for storing equipment inside his closed garage? The board believed so, yes. Judge Morrison turned to our side. Mr. Cooper, is there any evidence that other residents store business-related items in their garages without facing similar violations? Martin stood. Your Honor, we attempted to gather that information during discovery, but the HOA refused to provide details about other residents' storage situations, citing privacy concerns. Judge Morrison's expression suggested she wasn't impressed with that response. She looked at Patricia Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, you're the HOA president, Patricia stood. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have business-related items stored in your garage? Patricia hesitated. I don't run a business, Your Honor. That's not what I asked. Do you have any items in your garage that could be considered business or commercial in nature? Tools, equipment, supplies. I have standard household items, Your Honor. Judge Morrison made a note. What prompted you to inspect Mr. Winston's garage specifically? I was conducting routine inspections of properties in the community. Do you regularly inspect the inside of residents' garages? Patricia shifted her weight. When violations are visible or reported, yes. Was there a complaint about Mr. Winston's garage? Not formally, no. So you just happened to drive by his house at the exact moment his garage door was open and decided to cite him for equipment that was neatly stored and not visible from the street. The equipment constituted a violation, Your Honor. As president, it's my duty to enforce our covenants. Judge Morrison sat back. I'm going to take a brief recess to review the documents. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. During the recess, Martin was cautiously optimistic. She's asking all the right questions. I think she sees through their argument. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Morrison had clearly made her decision. I've reviewed the covenants, the violation notices, and the correspondence between the parties. Here's my ruling. The nuisance clause in Section 7. Subsection D does give the HOA board some discretion in identifying and addressing nuisances. However, that discretion is not unlimited. It must be exercised reasonably and consistently. Storing professional equipment inside a closed garage, where it's not visible from the street and doesn't create any disturbance to neighbors, does not constitute a nuisance under any reasonable interpretation of that term. The HOA's enforcement action appears to be arbitrary and selective. Accordingly, I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for declaratory judgment. Mr. Winston is not in violation of the CC and Articus for storing his snow plow equipment in his garage. The HOA must refund all fines collected and may not impose further penalties for this storage. Additionally, I'm awarding Mr. Winston his reasonable attorney fees and costs related to this action. Mr. Cooper, submit a fee petition within 14 days. As for the retaliation claim regarding the fine for providing snow removal services, I find that fine was clearly retaliatory and improper. That fine is also rescinded. Do either of you wish to be heard further? Bergman stood. Your Honor, we'd request a stay of the order pending appeal. Judge Morrison shook her head. Request denied. This order is effective immediately. If you want to appeal, that's your right, but Mr. Winston is entitled to use his garage for equipment storage starting today. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. I sat there for a moment, letting it sink in. We'd won. After months of fighting, thousands of dollars in fees and countless hours of stress, we'd actually won. Martin shook my hand. Congratulations. That was about as clear a victory as we could have hoped for. As we left the courtroom, I made eye contact with Patricia Henderson. She looked furious, but there was something else in her expression too. Fear, maybe, or the realization that she'd pushed too hard and lost. 2 weeks later, I received a check from the HOA for $900 in refunded fines. A separate letter informed me that my attorney fees, totaling $12,400, would be paid within 30 days as ordered by the court. I moved my plow blades back into my garage that same day. It felt good to have them mounted on the wall where they belonged, easily accessible for when the next storm hit. But the story wasn't quite over yet. In early May, I received a call from Tom Bradley, one of my neighbors in Pleasant Valley Estates. Gerald, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's a recall petition circulating to remove Patricia Henderson from the board. After what happened with your case, a lot of residents are concerned about how she's been running the HOA. I'm one of the organizers, and we'd appreciate your signature. Absolutely. When and where? I'll bring it by your house tonight. That evening, Tom came by with the petition. As I signed it, he explained what had been happening. Patricia has been president for 3 years, and she's gotten progressively more controlling. Your situation was the last straw for a lot of people. The fact that the HOA had to pay your legal fees, which comes out of our HOA dues, really upset people. Plus, the way she handled the snow emergency and then tried to fine you for helping was ridiculous. We've got about 60% of the signatures we need. Once we hit the threshold, we can call a special meeting to vote on her removal. Is that likely to succeed? I think so. People are tired of her power trips. And frankly, you embarrassed her pretty badly by winning that lawsuit. 3 weeks later, Pleasant Valley Estates held a special meeting to vote on removing Patricia Henderson from the board. I attended, along with what looked like half the neighborhood. The community center was packed. The vote wasn't even close. Patricia was removed from the board by a margin of 73 to 27. She sat in the front row during the vote count, her face red with anger and humiliation. After the vote, an interim president was appointed. His name was Michael Torres, and his first act was to announce a comprehensive review of all HOA policies and enforcement actions to ensure they were reasonable and consistently applied. Patricia Henderson left the meeting without speaking to anyone. I never saw her at another HOA meeting after that night. Life in Pleasant Valley Estates got significantly better after Patricia's removal. Michael Torres and the new board took a much more reasonable approach to enforcement. They clarified the nuisance clause to specify that it applied to exterior conditions visible from the street or common areas, not to items stored inside closed garages. They also implemented a new appeals process that gave residents a fair hearing before fines were imposed. My snow removal business recovered. Without the hassle of driving to a storage unit, my response times improved. I won back the client I'd lost and picked up 2 new ones. The money the HOA paid for my attorney fees more than covered what I'd lost during the dispute. Though the stress and aggravation couldn't be compensated, Claire and I decided to stay in Pleasant Valley Estates. With reasonable people running the HOA, it was actually a nice place to live. The neighborhood was well maintained, the location was convenient, and most of our neighbors were good people who just wanted to live their lives without unnecessary drama. I learned some valuable lessons from the whole experience. First, HOAs can be a nightmare if the wrong people get into power. Second, it's worth fighting for your rights even when it's expensive and stressful. Third, always read your CC and Articus carefully and document everything. And finally, I learned that sometimes karma works in mysterious ways. An HOA that fined me for storing equipment ended up paying me triple rate to use that same equipment, then had to reimburse my legal fees when a judge ruled they'd been wrong all along. One Saturday afternoon in June, I was in my garage organizing my equipment when Tom Bradley stopped by. "Hey Gerald, you got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "The board is looking for a new member. Your term would start in July. I think you'd be perfect for it. After everything you went through, you understand the importance of reasonable enforcement and protecting homeowners' rights. Would you be interested?" I thought about it. The old me would have said no immediately. HOA boards were nothing but headaches and drama. But after everything that had happened, I realized that good people needed to be involved in HOA governance to keep people like Patricia Henderson from abusing their authority. "You know what? Yeah, I'll do it." "Great. I'll add your name to the ballot for the annual meeting next month." I was elected to the HOA board in July with 78 votes, the highest total of any candidate. My first board meeting was surreal. I was sitting at the same table where Patricia Henderson had denied my appeal months earlier. But this time, I was on the other side, helping make decisions instead of fighting against unreasonable ones. We made some good changes during my first year on the board. We updated the CC and Articus to be more specific and less open to interpretation. We established clearer guidelines for what constituted violations. We created a proper appeals process with neutral third-party arbitration for disputed fines. And we made sure that enforcement was consistent and reasonable. The community responded positively. Complaints about HOA overreach dropped significantly. More residents started attending meetings and getting involved in community decisions. The adversarial relationship that had existed under Patricia's leadership was replaced with a more collaborative approach. I ran into Patricia Henderson one time after her removal from the board. It was at the grocery store in late summer. We ended up in the same checkout line. She looked at me, and for a moment I thought she might say something, but she just looked away and pretended I wasn't there. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in her humiliation. She'd been a person who let a small amount of power go to her head, and she'd paid the price for it. I hoped she learned something from the experience, but I wasn't optimistic. My business continued to thrive. When winter came again, I was ready. My plow blades were mounted securely in my garage, easily accessible for quick storm response. My crew was trained and prepared. My clients were happy with our response times. We got our first major storm of the season in late November. 20 inches of heavy, wet snow. My crew and I responded immediately, clearing all our contracted properties efficiently and professionally. As I drove home at dawn after a long night of plowing, I passed through the gates of Pleasant Valley Estates and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time when entering my neighborhood. Peace. The HOA nightmare was over. I'd stood up for my rights, fought against unreasonable enforcement, and won. More importantly, I'd helped create positive change that benefited everyone in the community. As I pulled into my driveway and hit the garage door opener, I looked at my plow blades mounted on the wall. They represented more than just business equipment now. They represented the principle that homeowners have rights, that HOA authority has limits, and that sometimes fighting back against injustice is worth the cost. I unloaded my equipment, took a hot shower, and fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. Another successful storm response. Another day of running my business the way it should be run without interference from power-hungry HOA presidents. Claire rolled over and mumbled sleepily. "How'd it go?" "Perfect," I said. "Everything's exactly as it should be." And it was. The following spring, I was approached by a local news reporter named Jennifer Walsh, who was doing a story about HOA disputes in Colorado. She'd heard about my case through court records and wanted to interview me. "Mr. Winston, your case is a perfect example of what happens when HOAs overstep their authority. Would you be willing to share your story?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted to put the whole thing behind me and move on. But another part recognized that sharing my experience might help other homeowners facing similar situations. "Sure, I'll talk to you." The interview aired on the local news and generated significant interest. I received calls and emails from dozens of people dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Some of the stories were worse than mine. People being fined for having the wrong color mailbox, or for planting flowers the HOA didn't approve, or for having guests park on the street overnight. I referred many of them to Martin Cooper, who was building a reputation as the go-to attorney for HOA disputes. Some of them I was able to help directly through my position on the Pleasant Valley Estates Board, sharing what we'd learned about creating reasonable enforcement policies. The publicity from the news story had an unexpected benefit for my business. Several commercial property managers saw the story and were impressed that I'd stood up to the HOA rather than just rolling over. They figured anyone with that kind of determination would be reliable in a crisis. I picked up 4 new clients directly from the news coverage. By the time the second winter after the dispute rolled around, my business was doing better than ever. I'd expanded to 6 trucks and hired 2 more full-time employees. The storage situation had been completely resolved, with all my equipment neatly organized in my garage, and a few items in a small shed I'd built in my backyard after getting proper HOA approval. That approval process, by the way, took about 2 weeks under the new board and involved a simple application with photos showing what I wanted to build. Michael Torres and I reviewed it at a board meeting, confirmed it met all the requirements, and approved it. No drama, no power trips, just a straightforward administrative process. One December evening, I was at a board meeting when we received a complaint about a resident named Frank Morrison, who was allegedly running an auto repair business out of his garage. The complaint included photos of cars in various states of disrepair in his driveway and reports of noise and activity late into the evening. I immediately thought about my own experience with Patricia Henderson and how she'd used a vague complaint to target me. I was determined not to repeat that mistake. "Before we do anything," I said, "we need to investigate this properly. Let's send someone to actually talk to Mr. Morrison and find out what's going on. If he's running a business that brings customers to his home, that's clearly prohibited in the CC and Articus. But if he's just a guy who likes working on cars in his spare time, that's different." Michael agreed. "Good point, Gerald. Why don't you handle this one? You've got experience with how not to handle these situations." I visited Frank Morrison the next evening. He was a guy in his 40s with grease under his fingernails and an apologetic smile. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Gerald Winston from the HOA board. We received a complaint about automotive work being done at your property. Can you tell me what's going on?" Frank sighed. "I figured someone would complain eventually. Look, I'm not running a business. I just like working on cars. That's my hobby. The cars in my driveway are mine and my son's. We're restoring them. I know it looks messy, but we're not doing it for money." "How many cars are we talking about?" "Right now, 3. A 67 Mustang, a 72 Chevelle, and my son's daily driver Honda that needs some work." "And you're not doing repairs for neighbors or friends for money?" "No, sir. This is purely personal. Though I'll admit if a neighbor asks for advice, I'll help them out. But I'm not charging anyone." I looked at the cars in his driveway. They were indeed in various states of restoration, but they weren't junkers. This was clearly a hobbyist situation, not a business operation. "Here's the thing, Frank. The complaint specifically mentioned multiple cars in your driveway being an eyesore. The CC and Articus do have some guidelines about vehicle storage. I'm not here to shut down your hobby, but can we find a compromise that addresses the complaint while letting you continue your restoration work?" Frank thought for a moment. "What if I keep only one project car in the driveway at a time? I can move the others to my brother's property outside the community until I'm ready to work on them." "That seems reasonable. Also, maybe try to keep the work to reasonable hours. The complaint mentioned late evening noise. I can do that. I usually work until about 9 p.m. on weekends." "Is that too late?" "I think 9 p.m. is reasonable. Let's say nothing after 9 on weekdays, 10 on weekends. Does that work?" "Absolutely. I appreciate you being reasonable about this, Mr. Winston. I've heard horror stories about HOAs shutting down people's hobbies. I've had my own run-ins with unreasonable HOA enforcement. I'm not here to make your life difficult. I just need to make sure we're all following the same rules." I reported back to the board at the next meeting. We agreed that Frank's situation didn't constitute a violation as long as he kept it to one project car in the driveway and maintained reasonable working hours. We sent him a letter confirming our discussion and closed the complaint. That's how HOA enforcement should work. Reasonable people having reasonable conversations and finding reasonable solutions. It's not complicated unless someone decides to make it complicated. The years that followed were relatively peaceful. I served 3 years on the Pleasant Valley Estates Board before deciding not to run for re-election. I'd accomplished what I set out to do, helping create a more reasonable and fair community governance structure. It was time to let someone else take over and focus more on my business and family. My snow removal business continued to grow. By the 5th year after the dispute with Patricia Henderson, I was running 10 trucks and had 20 employees. We'd become one of the largest snow removal contractors in Colorado Springs. And it all started with a simple principle that I'd fought hard to establish. I had the right to store my equipment in my own garage. Claire and I celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary with a trip to Hawaii. Sitting on the beach in Maui, watching the sunset, she brought up the HOA situation. "Do you ever regret fighting them so hard? It was pretty stressful for a while there. I thought about it. No, I don't regret it. If I just rolled over and accepted their unreasonable demand, it would have cost me just as much money in the long run with the storage fees and lost business. Plus, I would have hated myself for not standing up for what was right. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it's hard. You changed that community for the better. I'm proud of you for that. Thanks. Though I couldn't have done it without Martin Cooper. That man earned every penny of his fees. We finished our drinks and watched the sun disappear into the Pacific. It felt good to be far away from HOA meetings and snow removal contracts, even if just for a week. When we got back to Colorado Springs, there was a letter waiting from the Pleasant Valley Estates, HOA. For a moment, old anxieties surfaced. Then I opened it and laughed. It was an invitation to a community appreciation barbecue, thanking me for my years of service on the board and my contributions to improving the neighborhood. The event was being held in my honor. I showed Claire the letter. Can you believe this? The same HOA that tried to fine me into submission is now throwing me a party. That's not the same HOA, though, Claire pointed out. That's the HOA you helped create. She was right. The organization itself hadn't changed, but the people running it and the culture they created had changed completely. That was the real lesson of the whole experience. HOAs aren't inherently good or bad. They're just tools for community governance. In the wrong hands, they become weapons of petty tyranny. In the right hands, they can actually serve their intended purpose of maintaining property values and community standards without making residents miserable. I attended the barbecue and was genuinely touched by the turnout. Dozens of neighbors came to thank me for my service and share their own stories about how the HOA had improved under the new board's leadership. Several people specifically mentioned that they'd felt intimidated by Patricia Henderson's enforcement style and were relieved when she was removed. Tom Bradley gave a short speech about the changes we'd implemented and how they'd made Pleasant Valley Estates a better place to live. He presented me with a plaque that read, "To Gerald Winston, for standing up for homeowners' rights and helping create a more just community. With gratitude from your neighbors." It was corny, but I appreciated the sentiment. Fighting the HOA had been one of the most stressful experiences of my life, but it had led to real positive change. That mattered. As the barbecue wound down, a younger couple approached me. They'd recently moved into the community. "Mr. Winston, we wanted to thank you," the husband said. "We almost didn't buy in Pleasant Valley Estates because of the HOA reputation. But then we heard about the changes you'd helped implement, and it made us feel better about joining the community." "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "Just remember, HOAs only work well when good people stay involved. Don't just pay your dues and ignore the governance. Show up to meetings. Vote in board elections. Keep the board accountable." "We will," the wife promised. That conversation stuck with me. The real legacy of my fight with Patricia Henderson wasn't just that I got to keep my equipment in my garage. It was that I'd helped more people understand the importance of being engaged with their HOA rather than just hoping it wouldn't bother them. Now, several years removed from those events, I can look back with perspective. Yes, Patricia Henderson was unreasonable. Yes, the HOA violated my rights and cost me money. Yes, it was stressful and expensive to fight back. But the experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for principles, about how organizations can be changed from within, and about the importance of good governance at every level, even something as mundane as a homeowners association. My business thrived. My family was happy. My community was well run, and my snow plow blades sat mounted on my garage wall, ready for the next storm, exactly where they belonged. The HOA had seized them for bogus violations, forced me to store them off-site, then paid me triple rate to rent them back during an emergency, and ultimately had to reimburse all my legal fees when a judge ruled they'd been wrong all along. It was a wild ride, but it ended exactly as it should have, with justice served, lessons learned, and positive change implemented. And isn't that really what we should expect from our institutions, even the small ones like homeowners associations? Not perfection, but accountability. Not unlimited authority, but reasonable governance. Not power for its own sake, but service to the community. Those are the principles I carried forward, both in my business and in how I engaged with my community. And they're the principles I shared with anyone dealing with their own HOA nightmares. Fight for what's right. Document everything. Don't back down from bullies. And remember that organizations are only as good or bad as the people running them. The snow plow blade stayed in my garage for the rest of my time in Pleasant Valley Estates, a constant reminder of what I'd fought for and won. Every time I looked at them, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I defeated Patricia Henderson, but because I'd stood up for a simple, fundamental principle: the right to use my own property in a reasonable way without arbitrary interference from people on power trips. And really, isn't that what property ownership should be about? Not absolute freedom to do whatever you want without any consideration for your neighbors, but reasonable use of what's yours, balanced with community standards that actually make sense. That's the balance I fought to establish, and I'm proud that I succeeded. The story could have ended differently. I could have given up, moved away, or just accepted the HOA's unreasonable demands. But I didn't. And because I didn't, dozens of other homeowners in Pleasant Valley Estates benefited from a more reasonable, accountable HOA governance structure. That's worth more than any amount of money or any amount of stress. So yes, the HOA seized my plow blades for storage violations. Yes, they then paid triple to rent them back during an emergency. And yes, in the end, justice prevailed. But the real story isn't about the equipment or the money. It's about standing up to injustice, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's expensive, even when people tell you it's not worth the fight, because it is worth the fight. Always.